All right, so let's jump into it. These are the 7 elements of a good environmental sustainability strategy. First, we have compliance. There are existing environmental laws, reporting, permitting, and disclosures required for most businesses to operate. Then we have decarbonization. This is a very high priority sustainability topic, and that, of course, is minimizing your greenhouse gas emissions from your operations and your supply chain. Then we have resource use reduction and product design. At its heart, this one is all about efficiency and saving your company money. Then we have waste to landfill and also total waste generation. Fifth, we have responsible supply chain, all about ethics and sourcing. Then we have nature-based solutions and ecosystem restoration. So we talk a lot about sustainability when we really just mean being less unsustainable. This is where we're really coming in to regenerate natural systems supporting our businesses. And then finally, lastly, we have resource productivity, which is really an economic model for decoupling growth from natural resource use. I'm going to go through each one of these in detail for you now. So with environmental compliance, we have things in the US like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. There are also certain controlled substances that we want to watch out for within our operations. This is not my specific background, but I have dabbled in environmental compliance. One thing that I learned is you can think of it with the acronym WASH: water, air, spills, and hazardous materials. So for water, usually you're going to have a stormwater or water discharge permit where water getting released from your processes needs to meet certain specifications before it can travel to the municipal wastewater treatment plant and get returned back to the environment. Air. So whether you have boilers or generators or things like that on site, you're going to need air permits for those things because those emissions do contain VOCs, volatile organic compounds, or other hazardous air pollutants. Greenhouse gas footprint is not widely reported on right now as part of an air permitting situation, although that is changing, and I'll get to that in the very last bullet. Then we have spills, whether it be oil or other hazardous material, you need to have spill prevention, control, and countermeasures in place. And then we also have hazardous materials. So you'll see those triangle-shaped symbols for explosive gases, flammables, corrosives, etc. And we want to make sure that those are regulated and tracked within businesses. So that's environmental compliance is nothing new. This has been around for years, and I definitely think a good sustainability program starts with a strong baseline of environmental and even safety performance. Those are two fields that are usually lumped together into one department, but not always. But this is the backbone of any good sustainability program. What we're seeing, the landscape is changing really in just the past few years. So Europe is a couple of years ahead on reporting. There's actually a multitude of frameworks that they work with, and they're just now starting to streamline those frameworks and standardize to all the different frameworks that companies are reporting to. So it's going to be like a one-stop shop for sustainability disclosures and reporting in Europe. So if you do business with companies in Europe, maybe you've already been experienced this, or if you're a supplier, maybe you've been asked to fill out things like EcoVadis for them. So there are some companies being held to sustainability disclosures, and then these companies are now starting to ask their suppliers to start disclosing as well. So even if it's not required by the government, sometimes your customer is requiring it. Then also in the US, we have some recent legislation. For example, California last year passed a bill where companies doing over $1 billion in revenue need to start reporting their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So scope 3 emissions would be those value chain emissions. So again, if you're doing business with these big companies, even if you're not at that level, you're gonna start getting questions about your emissions. And then also the SEC recently passed federal legislation for publicly traded companies to start reporting scope 1 and 2. So they left out the value chain emissions, but your direct and indirect emissions are going to need to start being reported in 2026. 5. Don't quote me on that. I have to look it up. But really, these are becoming more compliance related issues, and especially with greenhouse gas emissions, is at the federal level. It's felt that investors should be able to look at a company greenhouse gas emissions, and also it's part of a general climate risk category of these quote non-financial related disclosures. I personally also think that consumers have a right to know what their companies are doing in these spaces. So I think that we're moving in the right direction, especially with the high priority issue of greenhouse gas footprints. Which brings us to our next topic, which is decarbonization. So, if you've signed up for this webinar, if you're listening to it, you probably already have sustainability in the back of your mind. You're probably at least somewhat familiar with the fact that we are in a climate crisis. Greenhouse gas concentrations are reaching levels not seen in literally millions of years, and this is creating a greenhouse gas warming effect, which is leading to extreme weather, etc. That's all I'm going to say on that, because I could talk a lot longer about the science behind all that. But what it means for us is that we need to absolutely do everything that we can to minimize our greenhouse gas emissions. And basically, the roadmap for this is very similar no matter what industry you're working in. Now, there may be some options available to your business locally or not available, and that's really where the implementation can get tricky. But in general, the theory is that you are going to electrify as much as possible, purchase renewable electricity credits to support solar and wind being added to the grid. Or if you have enough property, you can install renewables on your property to help offset that electricity use. And then you're going to offset any final remaining carbon emissions. It's very hard to get to a true net zero footprint or true carbon zero footprint at an industrial facility, and that's where that net zero comes in. So you may still have a few residual emissions, but you're offsetting that, so it's a net zero number. Now, greenhouse gases are measured in the unit TCO2e, which stands for tons carbon dioxide equivalent. You may be noticing I've been saying greenhouse gas footprint rather than carbon footprint. That's actually a slight annoyance of mine, because carbon dioxide isn't the only greenhouse gas. Of course, we also have methane, nitrous oxide, and other manufactured greenhouse gases like perfluorocarbons, for example. All of those energy sources, refrigerants, all of that added together is what's going to give you your aggregate greenhouse gas footprint for your business. To help further break down that footprint and identify areas for reduction, we typically measure or divide your footprint into what is called scopes. And this is from the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is the global standard on these accounting methodologies. So we have scope 1 and 2, which is your direct and indirect sources of emissions. And then we have scope 3, which is your value chain emissions. So think of it like your home. If you have a natural gas stove or maybe a lawnmower, that is a source of a direct on-site within property boundaries combustion source of fossil fuel. So that's going to be considered a direct scope 1 emission. Then think about your electric. That electric is being generated somewhere, and there's some quantity of fossil fuel likely being burned to generate that electric. So while, yes, renewables are making up more and more of grids around the world, there is still fossil fuel emissions associated with electricity generation. So you're using a portion of that, and you would have indirect emissions associated with your electric use. Then finally, think about everything you've ever bought or thrown away. All of those things were made in a facility or grown somewhere, transported to your doorstep, and then transported to a landfill or another recycling facility or something like that. This is what we call the value chain emissions, and it's not uncommon for value chain emissions to be a number of times higher than your direct and indirect sources. So if you think about a facility, one of the companies that I was working with, their scope 3 emissions were 90% of the company's total footprint, whereas scope 1 and scope 2 from facilities and actual owned operations made up just 10% of that footprint. Now, this was a huge company, but that sort of scale is not uncommon to see. So I want to walk you through just a little bit of specifics here. At the top, at these pictures, I'm going to explain that. So on the left, this is a real life example of a real plant that I worked with. This is the site emissions profile of the plant. So just over 60% was electric, so that would be a scope 2 source of emissions. Then we have natural gas, just over a third. They had natural gas boilers on site. They also had backup generators, so they didn't use them super frequently, but they were turned on sometimes due to power outages or also preventive maintenance. So there was some level of emissions associated with that. And then whether you work in food and bev or labs or anywhere that's using refrigerants or refrigerators or freezers, you're going to have, or even HVAC, you're going to have refrigerant associated with those systems. Sometimes those systems leak and that compressed air gets released to the environment, and those are manufactured or synthetic greenhouse gases that we use to absorb heat. And so refrigerants, you need to have a program in place to monitor refrigerant leakage if you have significant systems like that. So that's the breakdown of the emissions profile in 2015, for example. So now on the graph on the right, you'll see an 11-year overview of this site's total energy use, as well as their scope 1 and 2 direct and indirect emissions. So the site was actually growing over these few years. They were adding capacity, actually producing more product. And you can see that increasing physical footprint of the site as well. And so you can see that reflected in the total energy numbers here. 2018 was the peak year for energy. Now, we also started doing a lot of energy reduction and energy saving projects. And so you can see that even though the site had grown, we actually ended up with a 16% on track to achieve a 16% reduction in total energy use from 2026 compared to the 2015 baseline. So that was really exciting. And then we have the greenhouse gas footprint. So in 2016, you see a massive drop in those greenhouse gases. What could have caused that? Well, you see that electric was over half of the total footprint. And so in 2016, the site actually started purchasing renewable energy credits for its electricity. So all of those emissions went straight to zero. What was left was the natural gas, backup generation, and refrigerant. And you can see that that red line follows more closely the actual total energy use. It's more of a one-to-one quantity in terms of emissions to fuel source. And through energy efficiency saving projects, which translates not to just electricity saving, but also fuel savings, so reducing gas usage, and then also repurposing, capturing waste heat and repurposing that within the plant was another major theme of some of these improvements. You'll see that through some of those efficiencies, and then this site also planned to purchase biogas, which it's a near carbon zero replacement for natural gas. It's molecularly the same, but it's considered carbon neutral over its life cycle. And I'll talk about that in another webinar, but that's what's getting this site to the 99% reduction. And then the leftovers were backup generation and refrigerant, which still are very difficult to decarbonize areas. So that's a breakdown of a greenhouse gas footprint of a site. And in the words of Barack Obama, there is one issue that will define the contours of this century more dramatically than any other, and that is the urgent threat of a changing climate. If you work in sustainability, even if you don't work in sustainability, you can see the writing on the wall. Things are really going in an extremely dangerous direction, and adaptation to these temperatures and weather events is going to cost billions and billions, trillions of dollars, and countless number of lives. Our way of life as we know it, in fact, is shifting. Even within our generation, things are starting to change. We're seeing fights over water and climate migrations happening. It's really just a wild world out there, and this is really why we need to prioritize decarbonization. You know, sometimes there is trade-offs where it's like, well, is it okay to create more waste just to save carbon emissions? And that answer for me is yes. You realize very quickly in sustainability that there's no free lunch. There's always trade-offs, and everything that we can do to maximize decarbonization is what we need to do. So there is decarbonization, and now we're getting into resource use. So here we have energy use, water use, as well as product design. So this is talking about other raw materials that you use to make a product or run your business. Before this was called sustainability, this kind of efficiency work was called good business sense. I am an operational excellence specialist, so it was called lean or operational excellence. And we, professionals in this field have been working on process improvements and process efficiencies and good product designs for years. So this is really nothing new, but it's absolutely a key element in any good sustainability strategy. So for energy, it's, both electric and fuel sources. So thinking about reduction of that. Simple optimization projects like HVAC can make a very big difference, switching out your lighting. And then even switch off programs. So, this is a lot of employees want to get engaged in a green team, and something like a switch off program is a great thing for interested folks to champion, because depending on the rest of your profile, just turning off equipment, turning off lights at the end of the day could save you 3 to 5% on your annual energy bills. Water. So water is coming from the environment somewhere to your business facility and getting released back into the environment. Water efficiency is becoming extremely important. In fact, they say by just 2025, almost half of the world's population could live in a water-stressed area. So especially if your business uses a lot of water, you're going to be coming under even more scrutiny for that use. And so thinking of ways to not only reduce your water needs, but how could we reuse water in the facility, even using water as gray water, for example, repurposing it in toilets or sometimes cooling, those kinds of projects. And then also rainwater capture. So depending on how much roof space you have, how much water you actually use, if you capture enough rainwater, your facility could actually be a net zero water discharge facility, which is I've heard of it, but I haven't seen many facilities out there, but that's the general theory. Then we have product design. So it's not just about the waste that you're generating, but you're buying these materials and you want to make sure that you're maximizing the efficiency of those materials. Sometimes you got to look at the product design itself. Sometimes you have to look at the manufacturing process to minimize that waste and get the most out of those raw materials. Then we're also thinking about shipping configurations. So how can we design this product or design the packaging at least so that we can fit as many of these products as we can on one pallet and then as many pallets as we can into one truck. Then the third component of product design is end of life management. So sending things to the landfill is really the least imaginative way to deal with these, used raw materials. So it's really up to companies now to design products responsibly so that they can be recycled or right to repair is becoming an issue, so easy to repair, or also even take back schemes. Companies are doing that now where they will take back products and recycle them appropriately because recycling technologies may not be available everywhere that their products are sold. So that's another way to maximize these resources. This part here, this is where you're going to be saving money as a business. Sometimes sustainability costs money, sometimes it can save you money. And in these efficiencies, there's tons of rebates for especially energy projects out there in the US now, with funding trickling down from the IRA. Installing renewables has never been cheaper. This is the stuff that's going to save your business money, because other things like purchasing renewable energy credits or things like that, that's going to cost money. And this is really what we talk about when we say the triple bottom line. So not only are you making better products and engaging employees, you're also saving the earth while you're at it. So then, secondary to energy and water, we have waste. So the product design, I was kind of getting into waste here, but it really deserves its own category, I think. So we think of waste in two ways. We think, number one, of waste to landfill. We really want to reduce the total amount of waste that we're sending to the landfill. This would be considered your business's recycling rate. What percent of your waste is not getting sent to the landfill, basically. This is moving towards a more circular economy where materials are recycled or repurposed or reused. For example, they're cleaned and reused in their original form. That's what we want to see more of. This means we're switching to more recyclable materials, more paper-based materials, putting in reuse, making that happen, and then also composting. So in the US, nearly 25% of the waste that's getting sent to landfills is organic food waste, which is really just such a shame. And this is actually what can cause a lot of those methane emissions from landfills, is that organic matter. And so the USDA actually just released, I think it was a $50 million last year to communities to start implementing composting programs. So, if you looked into composting and it wasn't available, look again, because there's a lot of movement happening with composting. As a resident, you may be entitled to a free composting program if you're lucky, like me, here in Maryland. But as a business, you're still likely going to have to pay for composting, but it's definitely the right thing to do here. Then we have total waste generation. So not just how much are you recycling, but how much are you producing in total. So this is going back to those manufacturing efficiencies and maximizing raw material use. But this is, a significant portion of a business's waste stream is packaging from other materials coming into their facility. So anything you can do to reach out to your suppliers and um, create more efficient either shipping schedules or, trying to avoid individually wrapped materials as much as possible. These kinds of trends are going to help you reduce your total waste. And also things like expired materials, having good processes in place to really you're not reordering until things are getting depleted. Hitting that sweet spot will help you avoid expired materials as well. Then we have responsible supply chain. So we're getting more into the scope 3, the value chain side of sustainability. And again, there's 3 categories here. Number 1, it's your raw materials. Number 2, it's your human rights and your ethics issues. And then, of course, efficiency and decarbonization. So all the things we just talked about for your business, you're going to want to make sure your suppliers are doing efficiency and decarbonization as well. But it's not just about energy, water, greenhouse gases. It's also about traceability of your raw materials. So do we know where this is being harvested from? Is it coming from a sensitive ecosystem? Are we deforesting the Amazon? Are we polluting rivers in the process of harvesting? This is what raw material traceability looks like. And that is actually can be more difficult than you might think, because of course, companies who are doing those things aren't going to want to disclose them. As for ethics, this is where you're getting into worker rights and avoiding human slavery. Are you paying fair prices? Your suppliers operate in local communities, and we want to make sure that our suppliers are doing the right thing by those local communities as well, and not just exploiting them. And then there's also product testing in this category. So depending on your product or raw material or even components thereof, these products may be tested on animals or in some cases humans, like if you're in the drug industry. And so making sure that those are ethically tested is another piece here. And there is some stamps of approval, some certifications that you can start looking for, but it's also just good to sit down with your suppliers and start asking these questions. All right, then we have nature-based solutions and restoration. So as I said at the beginning, this is where sustainability as a term is really ringing true. I think we misappropriate that word a whole lot, where, using less energy, you're still not regenerating, you're just being less unsustainable. So the biggest companies are actually using their funds to start restoring ecosystems, planting trees, restoring wetlands, and this is called a nature-based solution. Why would these companies do that? Well, number 1, the biggest reason is because they're going to receive carbon credits for these restorations. So, the natural systems surrounding us provide us with water, they sequester carbon, things like that. And so when you're restoring these ecosystems, you're sequestering carbon in trees or wetlands or whatever. And so these companies are getting those carbon credits to help offset residual emissions that they can't just replace within their own facilities. Also, it sounds really good. It's makes for a great feel-good story, really good PR. And a lot of people love to see these types of projects, and it's a great, way to highlight your company's sustainability efforts is by actually getting out there and replenishing some of these areas where we've been over harvesting or otherwise damaging. There's one thing that's not on here that I want to mention, and a tree planting or getting involved with nature is just such a great team building experience as well. So even if you're a small company, I encourage you to get out and volunteer at a local park, plant some trees. You may not be able to officially claim all these carbon credits, but it's still a really good story to tell, and it still makes people feel really good to get out and do this kind of stuff. And lastly, it's not just about mitigation and carbon sequestration, but things like restoring wetlands. These ecosystems are actually going to help protect us from increasing weather events. So, planting trees creates shade, which is cooler. Restoring ecosystems helps absorb storm surge. We know these things are coming. And so it's not just about mitigation, but it's about adaptation as well. The last point, resource productivity, decoupling growth from resource use. This is probably the trickiest piece of a sustainability program, and maybe the most theoretical or nebulous of these suggestions, but this is really talking about an economic system here. So we're moving away from, we're not moving away from capitalism, but we're reframing capitalism. So GDP is not just based on products as much, it's moving more emphasis into the services area. And a lot of environmentalists are saying this is what a good low carbon economy would look like, is having more services, business to business, people to people services, rather than physical goods. So there is some good news. Countries around the world we're seeing they're still increasing their GDP while decreasing their carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. So while we see some movement here, much of our economic system is still based on profit, profit, profit. And, I was reading some quotes the other day, and it said, profit is to businesses as oxygen is to humans. Without enough oxygen, humans will die. Without enough profit, businesses will die. But if you think that life is just about breathing oxygen, we're really missing a whole lot of good stuff. And so, business isn't just about profit. Our metrics really struggle to reflect that. And that's why sustainability that's why the world is in the state that the world is in. But we really need people like you who can think critically and care enough to start reinvesting some of that profit, or in some cases, even, missing out on some profit because we want to do things the right way and, provide the most longevity for our businesses and our children and all that good stuff. So a typical measure that you might see here is a quantity of carbon emissions per dollars of revenue, for example. This is a really interesting space. This is the things that people in like the World Economic Forum and the UN Environmental Program with all the sustainable development goals, this is really what those big think tank groups are trying to figure out how to advance, is this decoupling growth from resource use here. All right, so that's the 7 points. Why would your business want to take this on? Well, number one, it's the right thing to do. I think that if you show people the data, give them the right resources, they're going to act. And I'm doing my small part in that today. And I think, we're all moral, ethical, we want to do the right thing. And sustainability is the place to start putting the rubber to the road here. Secondly, it's becoming compliance, whether you want to or not, you just might have to. So this is, again, a rapidly changing landscape. Legislation is getting passed. Larger companies are asking suppliers for more and more information related to this. So get ready. Then we have efficiencies. It's, as I said at the beginning, it's just good business sense. If you do enough efficiency, you're going to be saving significant money in your operating expenses and in your bottom line for your business. Then we have competitive advantage. So I was talking to somebody the other day who was in the logistics industry. They said, trucks, we're all the same. Trucks are all 55 feet long, hold 45,000 pounds. What sets my business apart from all these other businesses? And he was telling me how they plant trees for every mile traveled. They track and minimize empty miles traveled. So they're not just looking at things one way. They're looking at capacity round trip. They're looking into alternative fuels. And he was like, I would never get contracts with IKEA if I didn't have this stuff ready to go. And so sustainability is increasingly becoming a competitive advantage, not just to gain more customers, but also to attract more talent. So young people especially want to work for responsible companies. They see the writing on the wall. They want to make sure that their careers are with impactful businesses. And I think some of the most engaged, smartest, just most well-rounded people are drawn to sustainability. And those are the same people that you want working for your company. So developing a sustainability program is a great way to attract talent, get folks involved. There's a lot of new technologies. There's, big problems to be solved. I think people like being part of that bigger picture. And so you're boosting innovation as well. Then we're getting into risk management. So, it's not just the impact that your company has on the environment, but the impact that the environment is going to have on your company. I mean, we saw things like COVID-19 disrupt the entire business industry, and climate change is going to be no different. So the more sustainable you can be and the more mature your risk profile is, the more resilient and adaptive your business is going to be. Lastly, it feels good, man. I believe that we have an inherent connection to nature. And as soon as you start leaning into understanding just how intertwined not only our lives, but our work and our businesses are with the natural world, you really want to start doing the right thing. And I think we have that drive. We're products of planet Earth. And I think as soon as we start stepping into that space, for me personally, it just feels a lot more fulfilling. It feels like I'm part of a bigger picture, and I just really don't mind stopping and smelling the flowers. And I think that's one of my favorite things about working in sustainability. So with any strategy, whether it be quality or IT, it's not just about, here's the 7 points, make some metrics. We really have to talk about influencing human behavior. If sustainability was going to take off, it would have taken off. Sometimes it's not just about talking about greenhouse gas footprints and how the glaciers are melting. We really need to work on the psychology side of sustainability and how do we actually influence human behavior. So if you've never heard of the 6-box model, it's a very interesting concept saying, you can influence an individual's behavior, but you can change their behavior, but you really need to hit at least 4 of these boxes. So there's the individual, do they care enough? Everybody has their own personality. Not everyone's going to care about this stuff. You need to have the right people working in the right place. They need to have the right background or the right training to get engaged and know how to do what they need to do. And then you have the environment surrounding the person. So how are we managing employees? How are we managing expectations in the workplace? How are we holding our bosses accountable for implementing sustainability? Do you have the right training? Do you have the right tools that you need to track and report on this stuff? And then we have all the carrots and the sticks. So you could mix and match these boxes, but I think it's a very important point to touch on, that it's a psychological issue that we can dig deeper on to advance sustainability. And, it's not all your job. It's a lot of PR, especially from oil and gas companies and plastic companies, make it feel like the individual is the one responsible for recycling more. And yes, that is important, but really it has the smallest impact. And so don't get caught up on the small stuff. What is going to make you feel better and make a bigger impact is getting involved with your household, in your work area, in your local community. So get out there, join groups, attend webinars, meet people, make connections. That's what's really going to help move the needle more than just, oh, I'm going to pass out on a plastic straw today. So I encourage you to take these points into consideration when you're thinking about sustainability programs. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Please stay in touch. I'm Hannah Nickerson with Sustainability Solutions. You can find me online, sustainabilitysolutions.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Email me directly. I do sustainability baselining, so I'll come in and baseline your energy, water, waste, greenhouse gas footprint, and we can organize a strategy around your biggest opportunities. If you already have a sustainability program at work, but maybe you want to start getting your suppliers more involved, reach out to me and we can start working on a program for that. I will speak on this topic to one person, to 100 people, to 1,000 people, whether it's just your work area or a conference. I'm always open to speaking events. I have various Sustainability 101 trainings like this and on other topics that can be tailored to your industry. So let's brainstorm there. On my website, I have digital downloads that make it easier for you to advance more sustainable operations. I have example sustainability reports. I have a very simple, easy to use natural resource tracker that you can track energy and water in, things like that. So thanks for listening in today, and it's been a pleasure. I hope you learned something new, and please don't hesitate to reach out. All right, thanks.